everyone, welcome to Motion Tutorials, where we go over weekly topics in motion graphics, VFX, and 3D animation. I am your host, Sean Frangella, and this week we're going to recreate this Call of Duty Black Ops 3 logo that I saw in a new trailer that they released online to promote the game. So this was at the end of a trailer for the game, and I thought it was a really cool animation, and I wanted to take a crack at recreating it in After Effects with some tricks and Trapcode Particular. And I got pretty close and did some fun stuff along the way, so I wanted to make a video about how to do it, and if they see it, hopefully they think it's pretty cool as opposed to sending me a cease and desist letter and raining on my parade or something. So this will be a two-part tutorial. In the first part, we'll work on the animation of the logo, and in the second part, we'll add a Trapcode Particular to create some of this fiery glow and really the finishing of it that makes it feel kind of alive. So how this is working is I redrew the logo in Illustrator that we have here just to get our basic shapes. Pretty simple since it's just mostly squares. And then there's this logo animation that we'll do first. And then that's being controlled by a noise layer to create some random fractal noise with an alpha matte. And then this animation is the container that drives the animation and movement of these particles. So this will be a fun one to put together, a two-part one. And if you want to get a hold of these project files where I already put all this together, you can do that by becoming a supporter of the show on patreon.com/Sean Frangella. So be sure to check that out if you want project files and things like bonus content and all sorts of cool stuff. All right, let's get going. So the first thing I would do is recreate this logo in Illustrator, and I have that here. I'll just quickly show how we could do that because it should only take a couple minutes. I'll just make a new document in Illustrator. And originally I did this at HD 1920 by 1080, but I'll do 960 by 540 just to go half a 1080 since it's just a tutorial. And that's my stage. Now, I took this screenshot of the logo, and that can be my base. And all I need to do is draw out the numbers here along the center of my frame. So I'll just quickly unlock my guides and drag a guide and then align that to artboard center, and that's going to give me my centering, and that's just so I can make sure that this is centered. And I'm going to make 3 new layers with Command or Control L 3 times, and I'll just rename these 1, 2, and 3, and that's what I'll put the numbers on. And this first one is easy, it's just a square, and that'll be the basis for my shapes. So I'll just draw a square over here. And the main thing that's going to control this is adding a stroke to this. So on my little stroke texture, I'll grab that, change the color to white, turn it up a bit so it's about even, round off the corners over here. And then I'm just going to duplicate that by holding Shift and Alt. And I'll just pull this a little bigger. And then I just need to make points where there are those corners. So I'll just drag a couple guides so that I can see where those are going to end. And then in this one, I'll just press plus to get my plus pen tool over here. And I'll add 4 anchor points. And then I'll get my direct selection arrow over here and just shift select both of those, drag them in. And then I'll do the same deal with this side, copy it by holding Shift and Alt and letting go of the mouse, and then do Option, Transform, Reflect. And that's going to reflect it so it's symmetrical. And then I can just cut and paste these onto the right layer. So I'll do Command X to cut and Command F to paste for 2, Command X to cut, Command paste for 3. I'll just call this BG, and that's all we got to do in Illustrator. So I'll just go to File, Save this as a new Illustrator file. So I'll call it COD logo 3960 because that's the size. And then we can jump into After Effects. So in After Effects, I want to import that by going to File, Import, File. And I'll go grab that Illustrator file right here. And I want to import it as composition retain layer sizes. And I'll go to Open. And that's going to bring this in as a composition right here and pull in all the layers as separate After Effects layers. So what I can do is just duplicate this whole thing so I can leave the original one untouched. And I'll call this COD logo animation. And I'll make a new folder down here just to organize this for my 960 by 540 version. Since we're going to be making a few compositions and pre-comp, so I'll just put that in here and work out of this folder. Then I'll open that up, delete my background. I like to make Illustrator objects orange, so I'll do that so you don't have to. And then now we just need to create that initial driving animation. So it's pretty simple. The letters are just revealing and animating, but it's really nice and smooth. They did a good job with the easing and kind of the concept of it going from 1 to 2 to 3 over just a couple keyframes, and then these nice edges on the center number really just slowly fading in. So that'll be my main animation. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and time to 4 seconds. And for the number 1 and 3, I'm just going to press P to get position. And I'll lock that in as my end frame because that's where they're going to end up. And then I'm going to go to about 1.5 seconds. And this is where they just start to separate as part of the 2. So what I'll do to make sure these are centered is grab my number 2 and I'll just drag a guide out. And that can be kind of my reference, which I'm going to need for later. So at 1.5 seconds, I want them to be just separating. So I'll turn off this number 2 and pull them both towards the center and zoom in a bit to make sure it's pretty close to symmetrical. And this is where they separate to form the 2. So that'll be my second keyframe set there. And then at 0, they need to be overlapping and forming just a 1. So I'll pull the number 3 over to overlapping and the number 1 over to overlapping the other way. And then if we play this with 0, we get our initial animation. But the timing isn't really there, and that's kind of why this works really well. If it slowly goes from 1 to 2 and then really slowly goes to 3 as this one exactly animates down. So let's work on our easing. What we need to do is add ease in on these end ones by doing keyframe assist and ease in. And on these 2 center ones, we'll do keyframe assist and easy ease because it slows down a lot, and then it slows down and almost stops here, but still is moving a little, and then really slows down here. And to really edit those further, we can select them all and go to our graph editor right here. And if I zoom in, what I want to do is select my 2 keyframes and pull these curves so it really slows down at the end. And then we can do the same thing with this midpoint. We'll pull those curves so it really slows down. And editing your motion curves is really helpful in animation. It's going to get you a lot better animation timing and really let you control everything. And now if I scrub through, we can see we have a lot better animation. They really slow down and then stay for a second and then really slow down as they ease into the second position. But we have this problem here that they're overlapping. And if we just tried to mask each layer, the problem is that the mask goes along with the layer. So what we need to do is create some track mats for these objects on top of the layers, and that'll blend it together. And how we can do that is if we click off all of our layers, and I'll just get a rectangle, and I want to make it a fill with white and no stroke. I'll just go to my end frame, and I'm just going to draw a shape that covers up completely the number 1, and I'll rename this mat and pull this right above the number 1, and then on 1, I'm going to set track mat from none to alpha mat, and that's going to change it to where this white block is masking off that layer, but it won't follow along with it. So if we turn off our 3, we can see it's exactly blocking out that area. And then we can do the same thing with the number 3. I'll just duplicate this with Command D, drag it above 3, move it to the other side, and set 3 to the same track mat setting of alpha mat. Turn that layer back on, turn the mat off, and then we get our nice masking animation. And to get the same idea going with the number 2, we can use a track mat, but animate the scale of the track mat. If you look at our example render, it starts to just draw out at the top and then slowly fades in on the edges. So to do that, I'm going to turn this number 2 back on, and I'll go to the end. And what I want to do is zoom in, and with no layer selected, similarly draw a new rectangle. And I just want to contain this rectangle in there. And then I want to grab that shape layer, rename that mat, and press Y or the pan behind tool. And I can move the anchor point and hold Command to snap it to the center. And that's important because we want to scale out from the center point, not from somewhere out in space. So we want to move this right above the number 2. And then what we can do is set the number 2 to the same track mat setting of alpha mat. Rather than moving the number 2, we can actually animate the settings on this mat. So I'm going to turn back on the mat and press T, and I'll just turn the opacity down so I can see through it for now. And I'll solo these 2 just so I can focus on these 2 layers. So what I want to do is animate the scale with S of this and unlock these. And we're going to animate the scale going from 0 and then just before it reveals the edges, and then we'll animate it all the way out. So I'll unsolo those, and what's happening in the animation is right as these two start to separate and animate further out from the number 2, that's when this starts to draw in. So what we want to do to start is we can set a keyframe for scale 100 and just move that towards the end for now, because that's going to be our final position. And then I'll click and make a new keyframe, and on scale X, this first one only, which is why we need to unlock it, I'll press 0, and that's going to make it have 0 scale on X. And then I'll just go ahead in time to when they're close to pausing, and I'll turn this up to something near like 80 or 82. We want to get right before it reveals these. So now if I scrub through and play, we can start to see that that reveals those just about at the same time. And then when it gets to the edges, it'll just slowly draw on those edges. And we just need to do the same thing of working on our timing, because that's what's really going to make this work, is easing these keyframes in by doing keyframe assistant easy ease, and same thing in the second one. And then if I scrub through, it's looking pretty close. So now I can turn the opacity back up on the track mat, so it'll be back to working, and just shut it off so I can see that. And now if we scrub through, we can see that it starts to draw out exactly along and just about follows the timing. And now one little touch we want to do, we can see that our edges are a little sharp, and we want to really softly fade in. So since this track mat is just a solid object, what we can do is add a blur to it by going to fast blur, and I'll drop that onto this track mat, and I'll just turn the blurriness up just a bit, and that's just going to feather out these edges when they reveal in. So I'll turn that back off, pull it back here, and then I might just need to adjust the scale of that keyframe. And now we can see that it really smoothly draws that in on the edge and feathers it, and then just slowly appears that second line. And now if I just drag this out and RAM preview, we can see that we have our base animation. It's looking pretty nice and drawing in just how we want it to. It starts with 1, animates to 2, and then slowly animates to 3. And that's great. We can use this whole animation to drive particles and get to this sort of effect where it's that animation, but it's sort of organically animating and glowing around. But we want to do one more thing first to really add some interest to this. What I'm going to do is make a new composition, and I'll call this logo noise container, and make it the same size, 960 by 540. Go to OK. And then I'm just going to drag that whole original composition in here, so we have just that transparent animation. And rather than just solid white driving particles, we can create some noise in this and use the luminance of that noise to really animate this. So what I'm going to do is make a new solid by going to layer, new solid. I'll call this noise. And then on that layer, I'm going to get the effect fractal noise, and I'll drag this on. And this is just going to create these clouds. But what we can do is play with different noise types. So if I go to something like dynamic, dynamic progressive, and any of these, we're going to get different little patterns. And if we animate the evolution, it's going to organically move around. And a little expression trick that we can use is, rather than just using keyframes, if I option click this evolution, it's going to open up a little expression dialog box. And instead of keyframing, I can type in the word time, asterisk for multiply, and then type a number. Something like 100 should work. And that's going to animate that over time based on where the playhead is, multiplied by 100. So if I RAM preview this, it's going to create some nice organic animation that's going back and forth between black and white. And if I wanted faster, slower animation, I could just increase or decrease that number. If I go to something like 300, it's going to be 3 times as fast. That's probably too much. So we can slow it back down. And if we want even slower, we could go to time times 50, and it's going to animate even slower. But I'll stick with 100. And then we can get that animation built in without having to add keyframes. And if you're interested in expressions, I have a couple other expression videos that I'll link to right now in these little pop-up thumbnails. Be sure to check those out after this video if you really want to dig more into my top expressions, expression sliders, and all sorts of stuff you can do. But for now, that's the only one we need. So I'll close that. And now we can put this below our layer, and we can use the same track mat idea by going to track mat. Instead of alpha mat, we're going to go to luma mat. And what that's going to do is take the luminance of this solid animation and use that to show this noise. And if we zoom in, we can see that it's still the numbers animating, but within there, there's some of this noise going on. It's going to create kind of this organic pattern, which will really help vary up the particles when we get to that part. So there we have the first half of this tutorial. We are animating this Black Ops 3 logo from scratch to create this nice little typographic animation that's going to keep going and drive some particles and get really fancy with Trapcode Particular to create this fiery look that we have in our final animation. So if you want to keep going, follow that video that'll come up next, where we'll take this animation and create the particles from it. As always, thanks for checking out these tutorials, and be sure to subscribe on YouTube, as well as if you want to support the show and get project files, you can check it out on Patreon at patreon.com/SeanFrangella. It really helps to keep the show going. And if you want to ask questions, you can hit me up on Twitter. And I hope to see you in the next one, where we'll keep going and build out the second half of this animation. Do you like watching these tutorials and want to see more episodes more often? You can help keep the show going by lending your support on Patreon at patreon.com/SeanFrangella. More importantly, if you want to throw in a couple extra bucks, you can get bonus content like project files used in the tutorials, answers to direct questions, live hangouts for questions, and even request specific tutorial topics for me to use for my next video. Also, be sure to subscribe to the show by clicking the subscribe button or visiting the show homepage at youtube.com/SeanFrangella. And if you're hip with social media and have a question about this tutorial, you can find me on Twitter at SeanFrangella. As always, thanks for watching, and I will see you at the next video.